Thank you for joining us in worship. It is our heart's desire to have you present with us, and we appreciate your support, your contribution, your gifts, your prayers, your friendship. We thank you all. And we are so grateful that we have yet come together for another opportunity to hear a word from the Lord. This is the day that the Lord has made. We shall rejoice and we shall indeed be glad in it because He made it. And how can you be satisfied with the day that God has made? We shall be glad in it. Today is Father's Day. We're celebrating Father's Day. We all have a father, whether here or there, whether they have been called on by the Lord. We all have a father. We have that in common, irregardless of age, race, creed, or color. We all have a father. We thank God for fathers. Father's Day is a celebration honoring fathers and celebrating fatherhood, parental bonds, and the influence of fathers in society. It was first proposed by Sonora Dodd of Spokane, Washington in 1909, and is currently celebrated in the United States annually on the third Sunday in June. So, we are celebrating fathers. The nation's first Father's Day was celebrated on June the 19th, 1910 in the state of Washington. However, it was not until 1972, actually 58 years later, when President Woodrow Wilson made Mother's Day official. And so we're just excited to know that we celebrate once again this year, 2021, Father's Day. Let's just look at a few of the stats that surrounds fathers. There are an estimated 72.2 million fathers in the United States. There are 24.6 million fathers in a married or two-person household with children 18 or younger. There are 2 million single parents in the United States. Yes, 17% of all single parent households are single fathers. So let's keep those single dads in prayer. And the breakdown of single fathers, 44% are divorced, 33% never married, 19% separated, and 4.2 are widowed. And the annual income of, let's say, the average single father is about $50,000. And that's not the case for many fathers, and certainly too many fathers are making less than that. But hopefully we have family support and friend support, neighbor support for those single dads that are out there. We're praying for your success in your career line and opportunity for advancement and even higher pay as needed so that you can take excellent care of your loved ones. First, I want to say that fathers are needed in the homes. Of course, we're aware of that in so many different ways. Society suffers from a lack of fathers' presence. And even in the educational system, fathers and men and dads are wanted. They're constantly being sought and they're constantly being recruited because the image of man makes a very major effect in society, in our homes, and in the thought of the growth of the nation. Men are extremely important. God had a special place for men, and He made them first. 90% of runaways and homeless children are from fatherless homes. The percentage of rapists with rage that came from a fatherless home is roughly 80%, according to the National Institute of Justice. 70% of minors housed in state facilities are from fatherless homes. So fathers are desperately needed. And it's good to have a relationship with your children, if possible, as often as possible. The title of our message happens to be Like Father, Like Son, or maybe not. Like Father, Like Son, or maybe not. Oftentimes we think that our fathers have produced sons that are just like them. They're carbon copies, and in some cases that may be. Of course, in some, maybe not. Some say you're like a chip off the old block. Or another cliche is that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Well, perhaps the apple may not fall too far from the tree. But then, if the apple tree is on a hill, it could roll a long distance away and end up perhaps in another fruit field of sorts, an apple field of grapes, vines, No telling where that apple might roll, especially if it was on a hill. So let's just look at what the Lord has to say to us on the subject of fathers, since this is Father's Day. The main spotlight scriptures coming from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 18, verses 20 to 22. And I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. And written there, of course, is the person who sins shall die. A child shall not suffer for the iniquities of a parent, nor a parent suffer for the iniquity of a child. And if I were to rephrase that, just to interject, Father, I'd like to do that. The person who sins shall die. Of course, we know the wages of sin is death. A child or a son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor a father suffer for the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be his own, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be his own. But if the wicked turn away from all their sins that they have committed and keep all of my statutes, meaning God's statutes, and do what is lawful and right, they shall surely live. They shall not die. None of the transgressions that have committed shall be remembered against them. None of the transgressions that were committed, and anything wrong that they've done, shall not be remembered against them. For the righteousness that they have done, they shall live. The righteousness shall overshadow, shall cover the transgressions, is what is actually being said. The person who sins shall die. A child, or should I say a son, shall not suffer from the iniquity of the father, nor a father suffer for the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be his own, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be his own. But if the wicked turns away from all their sins that they have committed and keep all of my statutes and do what is lawful and right, they shall surely live. They shall not die. None of the transgressions that they have committed shall be remembered against them. For the righteousness that they have done, they shall live. That simply put, the prophet Ezekiel pronounces this to us. The words of God spoken through Ezekiel and penned for our reading. Like father, like son, or maybe not. As I look in the scriptures, I find that there is a warrior by the name of Gideon, served as the 5th major judge over Israel. He was a dynamic military leader, a judge and a prophet whose calling and victory over the Midianites are recounted in chapters 6 to 8 of the book of Judges. He destroyed an altar to the pagan god Baal, earning him the name Jerubbaal, meaning contender with Baal. And Gideon united the Israelites against their common enemies and through God's power defeated them. Gideon is listed in the Faith Hall of Fame in the book of Hebrews, the 11th chapter. And so it seems that this Gideon, this powerful warrior, this powerful leader in warfare matters, under the authorization of God, finds that he has a son who is unlike him. And it's stated that, and so the authorities actually gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Berith, with which Amalek, the son of Gideon, this fine gentleman of warfare, his son takes the 70 shekels of silver, mind you, and he hires worthless and reckless men, and they follow him. And then he went to his father's house and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Gideon, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Gideon, was left because he hid himself. So here we find the judge and the warrior, the fine man of valor that operates under the power of God, and he's committed to obedience and commitment, has a son by the name of Amalek, who despises his father's position and obviously despises his father. totally unlike his father. So much so that he purposes to kill all of his siblings, all of his brothers, all of his father's sons. And his father had 70 sons. So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of the idol, Baal. And the relatives of Amalek on his mother's side gave him some startup money to establish his leadership, to support his leadership. And he did this, but in a way they never imagined that he would have hired worthless and reckless men to kill all of his brothers, making certain that there would never be a challenger to his leadership. He was that desperate to rule, to be in charge, that he purposed to kill all of his brothers. Now that's a horrible pain for a father. For a father to lose any son is painful, but all of his sons, and he had 70. That's quite a burden to bear. In Judges 8:30, it's recorded that Gideon had 70 sons, but he really had 72. One of his sons were born after this horrible massacre. It was an awful thing. And I can assure you, Amalek was light years away in terms of character, discipline, stamina, respect. It's terribly fun. Nothing like his father. Nothing at all like his father. As I said, the title of the message is Like Father, Like Son, or maybe not. There were some pretty bad fathers in the Bible, some that you may not know about. One being Eli. Eli was a priest, so I'll just call him pastor of a church, based on today's terms. And Eli had some sons, and he had become rather old. And he heard that his sons were doing all unkind things, bad behavior, inappropriate behavior. And they were actually lying with women who served at the doorway of the church. That's not very good. It's not good on the women's part, but we're talking about fathers. And so it's not good on the men's part. And then we're talking about sons. And Eli, being a priest, had committed himself to the things of God. And even though he asked his son, I hear these things about you guys, and this is what you're doing. But why? I'm not pleased with what you're doing. But Eli doesn't put the guys out of the church, which I think would have been a nice thing to do, to excommunicate them. Plus, get your act together. Come back. We'll counsel. You can't serve in the capacity that you're serving. You represent me. I'm the father. I'm the priest. He did not do that. And then there's Samuel. Samuel, a man of God. Samuel was old. He too had sons. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah. And they were judging in Bathsheba. They were judges. Samuel had appointed them to be judges. And his sons, however, did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after dishonest gains and took bribes and perverted the justice. So there we have Samuel, a man of God, who has sons that he put in a position to be judges, and they can be bought. And they were bought, and they took bribes. And they performed injustices from an honorable position behind the powerful desk of law. That's not good. So here again we have like father, like son, or maybe not. This is another not case. And Samuel, how did he handle it? He really had to go before God because he's an older man now. But sometimes you let children get away with things a bit too long. You have to deal with things as you see things to be dealt with and not make up excuses. And so what if they don't talk to you, don't call, don't come? Okay. They will in due time. You keep them in prayer, but you must discipline your sons, fathers, and you must set an example in which they can follow and look up to. Because it so happened that Samuel's sons did not walk in the way in which he walked. They did not lead in the manner in which he led. And then we have another father that was not particularly the best father. And that's King David, an absentee, permissive father. What is most incredible about David is that he's likened unto God, and his father Solomon likened unto Christ. And it has been said that he was after God's own heart. And yes, we can be anointed by God and have many gifts. And God approves us and authorizes us to do certain things. But we have to stay within the parameter. We have to stay within the guidelines. Just because you're made king doesn't mean you can do anything you want to do when you want to. Just because you're king? Absolutely not. Because God is the one who sits down and raises up. God is the one who appoints and demotes. We have to keep that in mind. But let's just look at David. David had situations in his life that were pretty difficult to deal with. Some things he kind of, I feel, brought on himself, because when fathers like David are just out and about and always at war, they're not there with their children. And of course, David had 8 wives, Bathsheba being the 8th one. And each wife had her number of children. And each wife had her issues with wanting to be queen, and then wanted her sons to be the next in line for king. And all this rift is going on between the blended families. And David's absorbing himself with other entertainments. So much so that we know the story with him and Bathsheba. And then he causes her husband to, he kills it. That's the bottom line. He has him set up to be killed. And God's not pleased. And as a result of that, God tells him that the sword will always be in your house. Now you will live, but you'll live with the consequences of your choices and your behavior. And so here we find David. His firstborn, Amnon, was a rapist. He raped his sister, David's daughter. His second-born, Absalom, he wanted his father's throne and did everything he could to boot him up and out. And he slept with his father's wives. Not good at all. His fourth-born, Abijah, came against his brother Solomon because he didn't want Solomon to become king. He wanted to be king. David's 7th son was Solomon, who, as we know, violated every law God made for a king. He was just a insatiable, fleshy, power-thirsty man. And even with that, God used him. But not without some consequences. God is sovereign, you know. He does what he wants to when he wants to, with who he wants to, how he wants to. But we do know that David and his sons were different. Alike in some ways, but different. Again, I just remind us that the title of the message is Like Father, Like Son, or maybe not. Now, there are some good fathers that we find in our scriptures. Some very good fathers. And indeed, one of those good fathers is Jonabad. Jonabad was first mentioned in 2 Kings 10, where he joins hands with Jehu in destroying the wicked family of Ahab. And Ahab had to go. He was a very wicked king. Joab gave commands to his sons, and they obeyed him. And his commands were handed down to the next generations who did likewise. Not many fathers commanded and obtained such respect then or today. This man, Jonabab, sons respected him and obeyed him, and then they taught their sons to do the same thing in the next generation. Now we have another man of God who was a powerful father in the name of person of Job. Job was involved with his children socially and prayed for them every day. And each week they celebrated the things of God, because Job insisted that they not forget what God has done, that they reverence God and that they fear God. His sons used to go from house to house feasting, each one of them, day after day. I guess presume they had their dinners at different ones' homes, and they would invite their sisters, and they would speak on things, and I'm sure Job was there to teach them, giving them wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. He was an ideal father, and his children were well obeyed, and they respected him, like father, like son. Of course, we know the story with Job. The enemy did come in and destroy all they had, including his 10 children, but God gave these things back to him and gave him even double. But let's just look at David, if we will, because David is a popular name, a popular character in the Bible. And he was really an interesting king. God chose him. If we look closely, I think we can see a resemblance of David and his son, Amnon. Amnon had a vicious thirst for flesh, despite how forbidden the attraction it is, meaning incest, his own sister. But he was driven, a bit like his father David, the king. And then, of course, there's Absalom. He was driven to take matters into his own hand, as did his father David. And he purposed to see that his brother Abner was killed. It took 2 years before he pulled it off, but it was done according to his desire, because Abner had raped his whole sister. Even though it was Abner's half sister, it was Absalom's whole sister, and he was furious about it. In fact, the sister became so traumatized by it, she remained with Solomon for the rest of her life. She never married. I think it's just really traumatized her greatly. Her brother was very, very bitter to her after violating her and rejected her and said awfully cruel things to her and abandoned her. It was difficult. And her brother took it into his own hands. Before we go any further, let's just look at some Bible truths about children, and also challenge some of the false belief by considering some godly sons of ungodly fathers and some ungodly sons of godly fathers. It kind of goes both ways. If children are simply a product of parental influence, that would be great, but sometimes children are influenced at home, and yet they're influenced outside of the home. And it's their personality, their self-esteem, how they see themselves, their personal self-values, that will determine which way they will elect to go. You can do your very best with your children, but you never know. You never know which path they will travel. But it's always good to have done well before them and to have set a great example before them, that if they stumble and fall at their own error, they can never say, Daddy did it. I thought it would work for me. But rather, Dad warned me. I should have listened. When I look at David, what I find here, as I said earlier, that David had 8 wives and concubines in addition to that. And God said if he wanted more, he would have provided more, but his preference, his personal preference, overwhelmed him. But 8 wives is a lot of wives to have. And then he had 20 sons. One daughter is mentioned, one Tamar, who was raped, but he had other daughters as well. And so he had more than enough to keep him busy. I'm not sure if he was at all their birthdays. Probably impossible that he could have been, to be a king and to fight wars, to make decisions and to judge and all the things that a king does. Chances are very slim. But let's just look at David a little more closely. As I said, Amnon, David's firstborn, was killed by Absalom, for raping his sister. And then we have Absalom, who was trying to usurp his father's position, and he's riding through the woods and beginning to stir up more trouble for his father. And in the process, his hair gets entangled in the brush of the trees, and he actually gets hung in the process, hanging and dangling there, and the horse rides from under him. And of course, one of David's warriors comes up and kills him. That's a painful thing because, as I say, every father loves his son. And sometimes he doesn't realize how much he loves him and how tight the bond is and how deep the bloodline flows until something traumatic happens. The same thing applies even when a son loses a father. Sometimes, click, he doesn't see the value. He doesn't get the point until such time. Like father, like son, or maybe not. There is no guarantee. There's no guarantee, fathers. What we do is that we do our very best to emulate Christ. And if we're doing that, you can't go wrong. If you're doing everything you can possibly do to look like Jesus, to be Christ-like before him. When we're talking about fathers and sons, the last thing I'd like to share with us is the writings that are coming out of the book of Hebrews, the first chapter, verses 1 through 4. And it's recorded there, and I read from the New Revised Standard Version, that long ago God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, meaning the here and the now, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also created the worlds. He is a reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being. We're talking about Jesus, you know that. And he sustains all things by his powerful word. And when he had made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. We're talking about a perfect father and son relationship is that between God the Father and God the Son. Their relationship is impeccable, flawless, perfect, righteous, holy, sincere, concrete, fortified. God called his Son that he may give his life. And his Son obeyed him in submitting his life for our sins. That's an awesome relationship. If fathers of today, the 21st century, could really get in tune and in touch with God through his Son, Jesus Christ, and really purpose to hear God speak to them and to make them over into the father that God would have them to be, it would just be a wonderful experience. And it would be a testimony that you could pass on to your sons of how God transformed you from the carnal you, or maybe the fleshy you, or the aggressive, overbearing you, the mouthy you, the drinking you, whatever it might be. But if you could tell your sons that God came into your life and he transformed you from the madness that you were, the self-destructive path that you were on, and have led you into the newness of life, that would make such a great impact on the ears and the heart of your sons to be able to hear you say that to them. Just to be able to say how you would have stumbled and how you would have fallen had God not caught you and held you. Seek him first and his righteousness, and everything else will be added. And I know that fathers have to deal with their careers and all that's centered around that. We know that. We know that you have to work extremely hard. and to bring ends together. We're aware of that. And we know that you make great sacrifices. And that's why fathers are being honored, because you do go beyond the call of duty. And sons, please show appreciation for your fathers. Respect them. Be careful what you say. It's being recorded. You're being videoed. You're on camera. When we all get to that judgment before God, and He flips on our video, we can't deny anything. Only what you do for Christ will last. Honor your mother and your father, but honor your father, because we're celebrating fathers on today. Please do that. And I promise you, if you bless your father's father, who is God who created him, will bless you. Try it, will you please? Blessings to all fathers. God blesses all fathers. Happy Father's Day. Love you to life. God bless you.